2023 is gonna be a hell of a year for horror game remakes, with Resident Evil 4, Silent Hill, and now Dead Space. All three titles which were real cornerstones for the genre and something that fans are definitely gonna have high expectations for. And the Dead Space remake has just been released as the first cab off the rank, and look, I'll be the first to admit that I wasn't even entirely sure that this was a remake we ever needed. The reason I say that is because I think the original is something that still stands the test of time, and despite being 15 odd years old at this point, the base mechanics aren't really that dated or clunky that it ever felt like it needed any kind of update. Well, either way, that's exactly what Motive Studios have done here, brought a 15-year-old horror classic to a newer audience and modern platforms. And after having spent 20 or so hours playing through this thing, I have to say they've done a pretty damn good job with it. Is it perfect? Well, I mean, no, nothing really ever is, but the list of things you could cherry pick against it are just outnumbered by the amount of things it does well. To the point that I'm just kind of flabbergasted at how much fun it's been. Yeah, my flabber is gasted. This might be one of the best remakes I've ever played, at least as far as horror remakes go, and Silent Hill 2 and RE4 are gonna have some pretty big shoes to fill if this is the standard that they're setting right out of the gate.
Impressive. Very nice.
Now, a big part of that you could argue comes from the fact that the original is already really good to begin with, but Motive have managed to carry across everything that made the original so good, along with adding in a few new ideas of their own. So it's more than just a one-for-one clone of the same game.
So you keep saying.
Here we go.
So I think Dead Space fans can rejoice and let out a sigh of relief because we're going home.
Holy shit!
Right, so before we get too far into the video, I do need to take a moment to thank the sponsor, ExpressVPN. Here we are in 2023, a fresh, bright, awful new year, just right for people to steal your data off the internet, which is why you're going to want to start to use a VPN service. I've been happily using ExpressVPN for over like 2 years now, and there's a reason for that. Not only because they offer a really good service, but also because there's no reason to not have a VPN in this day and age. Well, a VPN is short for a virtual private network, and what this thing does is reread all your data through a secure encrypted server when you're on an unencrypted connection, which then means that people can't get access to all your sensitive information. Not only is this important for just privacy reasons, but it also comes in handy in a few other ways too. Like with streaming services like Netflix, a good example of that being with the series The Walking Dead. Now with this, you can't even watch this in Australia. But then if you change your location to the US, you get access to the entire series, right up until that show went to hell. It's the same thing with The Office. Now again, this is unavailable in Australia or the US, but change your location to Germany and yeah, boom, there it is. All up, there's over 90 different countries to choose from, and across the board, you get really fast speeds as well. Once you're up and running, connecting's about as simple as just clicking a single button and then you're good to go. And look, if my word isn't good enough for you, well, there's plenty of user reviews, not to mention reviews from tech sites too. Now, I've never had to use this myself, but there's also 24/7 live chat support in case on the off chance that something happens to go wrong. Sounds like it's pretty hard to fault, right? So if you want to join the club and get 3 extra months for free, well then head on over to expressvpn.com/Gman and get started. Now, the premise is going to be instantly familiar to anyone who's played the original. In fact, they haven't really changed anything in that basic regard. You're still playing as Isaac Clarke, a Starship engineer innocently clocking in for the day to then end up having a worse day on the job than people who work the night shift at McDonald's. Investigating a distress signal on the mining ship, the USG Ishimura, Clarke and his crew then step into a nightmare, finding the entire place and its inhabitants have either been wiped out or turned into space monsters known as necromorphs. By a supposed alien artifact referred to as the Marker. With only his colleagues Hammond and Daniels around for moral support, it's then up to Isaac to put the tools of his trade to use, fighting back against these horrific John Carpenter-esque machinations and turning curb stomping back into an art form. Along with being a handyman for pretty much the entire ship, repairing every broken down piece of machinery that he comes across. I mean, all he's missed out doing here by the end of the game is repairing a leaky toilet.
Holy fuck!
It's a classic sci-fi setup though, the clueless response team checking out the old distress signal and then being stuck inside a busted ass spaceship until help arrives. Plus that concept of the necromorphs requiring dismemberment to be killed felt like it was a bit of a unique spin on a tired survival horror formula. Well, as the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, so none of that stuff has been messed around with, and the opening of the game is almost copied beat for beat. It's all been updated visually and looks a hell of a lot better. Later on though, you will start to see some new additions, with the motivations and actions of certain key characters being changed around a fair bit, making some of these plot twists also feel unique and different, but it never felt like it came as a detriment to the overall narrative.
We stick to procedure, we'll get through this.
I don't really want to say much more than that, because I think as a returning Dead Space fan, part of the fun here is coming across all this stuff yourself in-game. So just know that it's not a complete one-for-one retelling of that original story.
Keep trying to reach them.
I did find it kind of weird though how they changed Nicole's appearance to make her look older. In the original game, she looked like she could have been in her late 20s, but then here, she looks like she's pushing 40. Because Isaac, on the other hand, now looks younger than he did before. You know, along with kind of looking like Adam Sandler's stunt double.
Shut up!
But this tells me two things, right? Firstly, that Isaac's got a taste for older meat, but then secondly, and most likely, is that they've just done this because that's what Nicole's new voice actress looks like. And ultimately, it's not like it really ruins her role in the story, so people who write her entire character off as a result of this modification should probably just, you know, go outside and start interacting with the real world for a change.
He ain't lying.
One of the biggest new additions, though, is that Isaac actually talks this time. Yeah, compared to the original, where he was oddly silent unless he was taking damage or letting out his anger and frustrations on innocent supply crates. In the remake, throughout all the dialogue and the cutscenes, he's now fully voiced.
You got a better idea?
He's even voiced by the same guy who did Isaac in Dead Space 2 and 3, so there's a bit of consistency there too that I'm sure fans are going to be happy with.
The ones I saw, some of them were wearing Ishimura uniforms.
And what's even better than that is that they limited his dialogue to these cutscenes. They didn't feel the need to have this guy constantly remarking and commenting on every little thing that happens throughout the game. Do you know what I'm talking about here? How so many games these days have the main character making observations like every 5 seconds.
Looks like I can slide down there. Look on that post.
No shit.
Mostly, I think, because the play demographic for those kind of games are people who have an attention span shorter than a tadpole. Here, though, Isaac never mutters to himself or gives away hints or puzzle solutions or pointlessly remarks on his surroundings. Not once. And all I can say to that is thank fucking God. They don't stoop to other lame gaming tropes either, like squeezing through tight gaps all the time. In fact, I think you squeeze through one tiny gap in the entire campaign, and it's entirely done to set up a jump scare. The other main character of the game is the Ishimura itself, and this has also had a bit of a change as well. Compared to the original game where each chapter was broken up into like a different section of the ship, the remake has much more of an open feel to it, with the transition between each chapter being much more seamless and not broken up with a loading screen. And I really like it too, how as soon as you load into the game and hit continue, the game's already loaded your recent save file and puts you right into the action.
I gotta tell you, it was perfect.
As a result, now pretty much the entire story is played out in real time, with the player making the trek from one section to another. The tram's instead used as a sort of a fast travel system to get around the various areas of the ship, and I know that this is pretty much just hiding a loading screen, which is fine, but the whole thing never actually takes you out of the game, which really helps that immersion.
Station now accessible. Thank you for your patience.
And besides, you don't need to ride the tram every 2 minutes either, unlike a certain other game that has a protagonist spending more time in vents than a headcrab does.
And it goes on like this.
In certain areas now, you'll also need to bug around with circuit breakers, which is also a new mechanic. Like at one point, you got to decide between turning off the lights in an area or turning off the life support. The catch there being that with the lights off, you aren't going to see jack shit, but at least you don't have to worry about suffocating. Whereas with the life support system off, you can obviously see, but then you've got that ever-dropping air supply to worry about instead. Just kind of adds a new challenge into some of these familiar areas, and lets the player decide how they want to handicap themselves. Certain doors and even lockers are now even restricted by security clearance, with there being 3 in total, and then a master level clearance you can only unlock by completing one of the side missions.
The security override generated for Isaac Clarke. All access will be logged.
Oh yeah, the game's got side missions now as well, giving you even more of a reason now to explore every little blood-soaked nook and cranny. Actually kind of reminds me a bit of the System Shock games, being able to explore the ship at your leisure and then go back to previous areas to pick up the kind of stuff you missed. Or go back and unlock that one room that you previously didn't have access to.
Logging security card.
And throughout all of this, you're still going to be seeing some of those familiar looking areas, most of which pretty much just look amazing. I mean, goddamn son, this is just a phenomenal looking game at times, and one of the best looking horror games I've played in recent memory. The remake runs on the Frostbite engine, and I think one of the best things that Electronic Arts ever did was put this engine to good use, and that's exactly what they've done here. It's kind of a bit funny to me in the way that the remake looks like how my brain remembers the original game looking, if that makes sense. And although the original game's still kind of stunning visually, which is something the art style's mostly responsible for, the way they've managed to update things but still keep that same overall aesthetic is a massive testament, man, to the talent at Motive Studios.
Impressive. Very nice.
And I think a big part too of why the whole thing works is the return of this god tier sound design. From all the horrific blood-curdling screams of the necromorphs through to Isaac's muffled grunts, it's all there. You're just so on edge here the entire time that even that sound of someone contacting you via radio is enough to make you have a goddamn heart attack. They've even brought back that nightmare room, with the ambience that could best be described as the sound that two cosmic horrors make when they're bumping uglies.
I hope it's worth the noise!
It's also got that kind of attention to detail with the lighting that takes me years back in time to playing a game like Doom 3. Back when level designers really used the light as an extension to the horror aspect, creating these hauntingly beautiful backdrops where you never quite know when or where something's going to pop out to attack you. Simple sequences like walking down a corridor that gets destroyed and succumbs to the vacuum of space just look amazing, just chock full of these really awesome little visual effects. One of my favourite things about the original game was how whenever you'd find that next bit of improved upgrade for Isaac's armor, you'd get that really cool animation that would play as Isaac hopped into the machine to get kitted out. So being able to see that again copied across almost verbatim with all these new and improved looking armor designs is pretty damn cool.
Everything, down to the last minute details.
I don't know if I'd say the other animations are like outright better than the original. To be honest, I'm not even sure there was room to improve those to begin with, and I guess that's the curse of trying to remake something that hasn't really aged all that much either. If nothing else though, I'm just glad this isn't another Unreal Engine shit show, and it's so damn refreshing, man, to play a AAA game on launch that doesn't run like complete rubbish. I've got an RTX 4080 and an i7 10700, and on the ultra settings, the game barely dipped under 100 frames per second. Again, probably due in part to NVIDIA DLSS, which is just complete black magic. What's even weirder though is that the game seemed to run better when I had it in 4K ultra-wide. I like to capture my games in 1080 just because it makes it easier for editing, and after I'd captured the bulk of the footage that I needed, I swapped it back to ultra wide, and then, yeah, somehow that increased the frames that I got, so, I don't know, explain that one. I've got to admit though that it does get a little bit too dark at times for my liking, and there's certain rooms where it just kind of feels like there's not enough light sources to begin with. But look, by and large, this is a great looking game, and the fact that it seems to run so well is just the icing on the cake. Also consider that this is all before proper drivers have even been released, so I'm hoping the performance is only going to get better over time. It also seems to be relatively bug and glitch free, and the only real bug I saw is the one you're looking at right now, where an NPC just went haywire and crapped out. Also at one point, the hunter who was chasing me decided his home planet needed him and he had to go home.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
There's also the return of those clingy corpse physics, but I'm almost kind of wondering if they left that stuff in on purpose, as some kind of a throwback to the original game. As for the gameplay side of things, well, playing this remake's like finding an old pair of jeans you forgot you had in the closet, throwing them on to find they still somehow miraculously fit, and then walking around like they're brand new. In other words, it really just feels like I'm playing an updated version of a 15-year-old game, but I don't mean that in a bad sense. And again, it's not really like they could have done too much to improve upon the original, considering that it still really plays the same as any other modern third-person shooter. And the aim of the game here is still very much around dismembering the necromorphs above all else. There is the inclusion of a new difficulty mode named Story Mode, which, look, we all know what that's code for at this point. And this, along with Easy Mode, I think is really catered towards small children, the elderly, and house pets. So much like the OG, hard mode is really the way to go. With the weapons, you've got the return of the plasma cutter, the pulse rifle, the ripper, the line gun, the force gun, the flamethrower, and the contact beam. And the plasma cutter is again by far the most useful weapon in the entire game, to the point if you don't have this thing equipped at all times, well, you're playing the game wrong. As for the other weapons, well, there's definitely advantages and disadvantages, but I just don't think you can go wrong here with the pulse rifle, the force gun, and the line gun. The pulse rifle is just a good, honest, hard-working weapon, man, pumping out a bazillion rounds a minute, and just being the very definition of spraying and praying in its purest form. It's not exactly the pinnacle of strategic gameplay, but it's kinda handy when you're shitting yourself in combat, and all you can mentally muster is holding down the fire button. The force gun is about the best get-out-of-jail-free card in the entire game, knocking pretty much every enemy backwards on their ass with a single hit. At which point you can either finish them off with a few more shots or swap to another weapon instead. Also, with the upgraded gore system in this remake, when you use the force gun, you can literally blast the flesh off enemies, revealing all that rotting sinew and bone beneath, which is a really cool visual effect. And it kinda makes everyone look like the Tar Man from Return the Living Dead. As for the line gun, well, the line gun is just the goddamn line gun, son. It's a plasma cutter on steroids. It just shreds through practically everything. It sounds good, it looks good, and few things are more satisfying than cutting a necromorph's legs off and watching it crawl towards you with its arms. I think the exception and a weapon that no one should ever use though is the flamethrower, which again, like the original game, is kinda useless. And I still find it baffling that it got included in a game where 99% of the kills you make require dismemberment. And trying to dismember something using a flamethrower is like trying to erode away granite rock by throwing a cup of water at it. About the one thing it has going for it is that, like the force gun, you can see this weapon affecting the necromorphs in real time. With this thing, it roasts the flesh from their bones, and about all you're missing at that point is a bag of marshmallows. However, it does seem to be more effective now in the remake, and the new alternate fire mode drops down a firewall, which is kinda good at holding enemies at bay, but there's just far better options in this thing, and it often feels like I do a better job at killing enemies by shouting at them. Weapon upgrades are back too, another really addictive element from the original, and something you won't even come close to maxing out for a first playthrough. Some of these upgrades in the alternate fires have also been changed around too. So the pulse rifle, for instance, now has the grenade launcher alternate fire from Dead Space 2. And the force gun now shoots out a gravity well, which is kind of like a mini vortex that sucks all enemies in. The contact beam, which was more or less like a charged up railgun in the original, now fires a constant stream of energy out, and then the alternate fire is that traditional firing mode that most people are familiar with. Instead of a mine, the line gun can now drop down a laser which can be directed over a set area and slices up anything that goes through it. And even the plasma cutter can be upgraded, causing shots to burn enemies. The thing is though, to max out all of these weapons and the upgrades, not only do you need to find the nodes, but you also need to find the weapon parts, which are scattered throughout the Ishimura. Another thing is that this remake does have the same problems the original had when it comes to the balancing of weapons, and that kind of being the dilemma of why you'd ever bother carrying more than one or two at a time. Now, people who've played these games are going to know that it's got a very similar RNG system to a game like Resident Evil 4, where some unseen number crunching mechanic decides what items to dole out to the player based on how you're playing at that specific moment to give you what you need the most. So if you're running low on health and barely scraping by, well then the game might chuck a medkit your way, and if you're equipped with a plasma cutter and a pulse rifle, then the game's only going to give you ammo for both those weapons. And it is a good system, but it's also easy to exploit, because for the more weapons you don't equip, the more ammo you get for the ones that are. That means you can have 4 weapons equipped and have bugger all ammo for any of them, or only have 2 weapons equipped and be flush with ammo for both. And because the plasma cutter is so effective to the point that you can literally finish the entire game without ever needing to use anything else, kind of begs the question why you'd ever want to carry around 4 weapons and have to share RNG ammo drops across the lot. And I guess it's a bit of a bummer to me that they didn't find a way to balance all of this stuff out. But I guess on the other hand, that's something that the fans of the series are probably going to revel in. You know, the fact that they've kept this system intact. I do want to say too that I think the enemies are also much spongier in the remake. Now, I finished the game twice on hard mode, once for my first playthrough and then again for New Game Plus. And I don't know if it's just the way they've rebalanced the weapons, but I definitely noticed it took a lot more shots here to remove limbs, especially with the tougher enhanced necromorphs. Even with the contact beam, which was an absolute force of nature in that original game, just kind of seems like it's been really neutered this time, and enemies just often walk through that blast like it's a slap on the ass. Fuck you! Also, the enemies that were annoying in the original game are, lo and behold, still fucking annoying. Like the Guardians, those stationary assholes that keep shooting out little tentacles are a pain in the ass to deal with. Still. And the Swarmers, those tiny little sacks of shit that look like Mickey Mouse's gloves, are back too. And not much has really been done to improve them, making it, you know, feel like something out of 2008. But where the combat really starts to shine is when you start throwing stasis and kinesis into the mix here. Kinesis is that wonderful ability that lets you pick up nearby objects like explosive containers or spikes, and then throw them into enemies to do extra damage. And then stasis lets you slow down enemies altogether, giving you much needed breathing room and extra time to line up your shots. And with all these powers combined, this right here is when the combat loop in Dead Space starts to really kick off. And it's really one of those games where you just kind of get into a bit of a zone, where you start to really predict where enemies are coming from, you time your shots and your reloads properly, and then throw in the odd stasis or kinesis throw into the mix. Once you hit that peak after a couple of hours, the game just becomes incredibly fun and satisfying to play. And the odd hit that you take here and there is just like a minor nuisance in a combat system that you've otherwise made your bitch.
Come here, you little squirt.
I really enjoyed going back and playing through some of those returning combat sequences as well, like taking on the brute on the ship's bridge, that claustrophobic ambush inside the decontamination chamber, clearing out the wheezes in hydroponics, along with all those various times you get ambushed by the Leviathan's tentacle. Yeah, it's pretty massive for a small guy like Isaac, but the kind of thing your mum deals with on a nightly basis. They've also changed around a few of these sequences too, like one of the most infamously difficult sections in the original game was that bit when you had to shoot all these asteroids down from the world's crappiest controlling gun turret. It was the absolute bane for people who played it on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, but now it's like completely different and almost challenge-free, as you instead control these turrets with your kinesis while floating in zero gravity.
Calibration complete. Cannon auto-targeting online.
That's actually worth mentioning too while I'm on the subject, the way the remake seemed to have a bit of a fondness for those zero gravity sections.
Entering vacuum.
Adding in way more of these areas, and it even adds in the controls from Dead Space 2 as well, letting you move freely in any direction. And I think this is both a good and a bad thing, and the reason I say that is because in this mode, when you're flying around like Tony Stark, you can't simply pitch up or down. You have to aim up or down instead if you want to change your elevation, which might not sound like too much of an issue, but it really is, and it makes navigation kinda clunky. Trying to keep your orientation when you're in an area where you've got to also move around all these pieces of machinery, combined with that lower FOV when you're in flight mode, is not the best kind of gameplay. But the thing I hate the most about these zero gravity sections is how every single time without fail, as soon as you enter these, a couple of enemies suddenly appear to attack you. Every single time, and it's as predictable as it is tiresome. The most annoying enemies in that regard are by far the lurkers, those little bastards with 3 tentacles coming out of their back that fire darts at you, and trying to pinpoint where you're getting hit from when it can literally be any single direction does not really make for a fun time. So again, yeah, it's kind of a shame they couldn't find a way to improve these controls from the base game, though they did bring back Z-Ball, so it has got that going for it. The remake still comes to an end with that suitably epic final boss fight and that cliffhanger ending, and going through all of those beats again was as much fun now in 2023 as it was all those years ago back in 2008. And you want to know what's really sad is that this remake is pretty much everything I wanted Callisto Protocol to be. An updated version of Dead Space with new mechanics and ideas, but keeping the feeling and tone of the original. And I guess it turns out the only thing capable of doing that is an actual Dead Space remake. More than that though, it has what every survival horror game should have on launch, and that's a New Game Plus mode. And isn't it kind of funny too how Callisto Protocol have finally added a New Game Plus mode to their game? Also around the same time that Dead Space is coming out, yeah, it really makes you think. Honestly, I feel like I only play survival horror games to play through New Game Plus. Being able to go back in for a second, third, or fourth run. Slowly upgrading and maxing out all your weapons and abilities, I mean, it's the kind of stuff that makes the whole experience that much more fun. And replaying through this with that max level armor suit, which by the way looks fucking badass, was as fun, if not more so, than my first playthrough. And that word right there, that's the big takeaway I have from this entire remake. Fun. I know it's just been so long since I've said that word when I'm playing a game at launch. And it just feels like it's been so long since I've been able to play a game at launch that isn't full of bugs or glitches, that doesn't run like shit or doesn't run at all, and doesn't hide all the best content behind paywalls or DLC. It's kind of telling of how stagnant the industry's become that the only game to do this is something that's a remake of a game from 15 years earlier. In fact, I'd argue that 15 years ago was the last time where the industry was really thriving.
He ain't lying.
So overall, can't think of a reason to not recommend this remake. People who haven't played these games at all are going to enjoy the horror, the combat, and exploration aspects. And for those people who know the original more than their own family members, it retains enough of those old elements and then adds in more of its own to warrant a return visit. I'm not sure if I'd outright say the remake replaces the original, but goddamn son, it does a damn good job at trying. And if this is the kind of effort and quality we got out of the first game being remade, well, then I can't fucking wait to see what they do with the second game.